Hello, I'm Martin Evening, the author of the Adobe Photoshop Lightroom book, and I wanted to show you here a comparison of importing photographs from a card into the computer using different programs. And for the sake of clarity, I should say that the computer used here was a Retina iMac running Mac OS X 10.10.2, and all the file imports were carried out copying the files to an SSD hard drive. The images were all imported using a Kingston USB 3 card reader to a USB 3 port on the computer, and the files were imported from a Sandisk Extreme Pro SD card, and the card speed was rated at 95 megabytes per second data transfer. And the card itself contained 97 Canon RAW files, and the total file size on the card was 2.7 gigabytes. To begin with, I copied the files using Photomechanic version 5, and here I'm copying the files to a folder that's on the desktop, and to make it a bit quicker I'm speeding up the import process here ×4, and then the measured time for that import, I measured it as being 36 seconds, which works out at a transfer rate of 77 megabytes per second. So that's using Photomechanic 5, and I think you'll agree that's a pretty good and impressive rate. Let's see what happens if instead of using software, I just simply copy the files from the card to a folder that's on the desktop. And again, I'm speeding up the import process here. And the measured time for that import is identical to using Photomechanic 5. It worked out at 36 seconds at a transfer rate of 77 megabytes per second. Now bear in mind that these are speeds on a Mac. You might find that they'll be different if we're using a PC computer. After that, I wanted to compare using Phase 1 Capture One Pro version 8. Again, I'm copying the files from the card to a location that's on the same SSD drive, and I'm going to speed up the import process here. And the measured time for that import worked out at 47 seconds, which is a transfer rate of 59 megabytes per second. So it's slightly slower than copying the files directly from the card, and also slightly slower compared to Photomechanic 5. So now let's have a look at the latest version of Lightroom, running Lightroom 6.2.1. This is the update, not the original version, because the original one did have some annoying bugs in it, to say the least, which also included slow import times unless you had the Add Photo screen disabled. So this is running the update that was designed to fix that. And if I speed up the import for this, where I'm also choosing to build smart previews and convert to DNG, let's see what happens if I speed up the import process there and measure how long that import takes. And now also it's including the time that it takes to build the smart previews and also convert to DNG. And the import time for that worked out at 55 seconds, or equivalent to a transfer rate of 49 megabytes per second. And if we take into account the time that it took to build the smart previews and convert to DNG, that also added on another 165 seconds. But I'm going to take the time that it took just to import the photos off of the card, because this is the fairest way to compare the import speeds for Lightroom with Photomechanic and Capture One, and also dragging the photos off of a card. So that was the speed that it took using Lightroom 6.2. Now you will have heard maybe that Lightroom 6.2 is now reverting to the former method of importing photos as found in 6.1.1. So here I'm showing you the import time that it takes using the previous version of Lightroom before the update. And in this case, the measured time that it takes to import those files is 47 seconds, or a transfer rate of 59 megabytes per second. So how does this compare all together, looking at all the import speeds so far? So in first place at the top, we have the Mac OS X import tied with Photomechanic 5 at 77 megabytes per second import time. Following on from that, we have Capture One Pro 8 at 59 megabytes per second, but you'll notice also that the previous version of Lightroom 6.1.1 has an identical speed to Capture One Pro 8. But if you're using the latest version of 6.2.1, even with the improvements that were made, that were designed to prevent the crashing and all the other problems, then the speed is 49 megabytes per second. So there is a bit of a slowdown there. At the end of the day, it is true to say that the latest version of Lightroom is slower than previous versions, though I'd argue probably not as much as you might have been led to believe. Probably the biggest factor that you'll find that's going to make a difference to the speed of your imports is actually going to be the card itself. So stuff to think about when you're comparing programs and working out which one's the best for you.